Welcome to Kain, where the weak rise into legends. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe. Because here, every story only gets crazier. The world didn't end with a whisper, it ended with a presence. Something unnatural, something that didn't belong to this reality, appeared in the sky like a black sun swallowing everything around it. No one understood what it was. No one had time to. Because the moment it arrived, the world began to break. Cities burned, the ground cracked, and the sky itself turned into something hostile. And for those who survived that first moment, life would never be the same again. It wasn't just destruction, it was consumption. As if reality itself had become prey to something far beyond human comprehension. People watched in horror as the sky twisted, stretched, and then tore apart like paper. And from that tear, something began to descend. Not gods, not demons. Something worse, something that didn't follow any known rule of existence. Panic spread faster than the destruction itself. Governments collapsed within hours. Communication lines died almost instantly. There was no plan, no defense, no way to fight back. Only chaos, only fear. And the horrifying realization that humanity was no longer in control of its own world. But in the middle of that chaos, there were those who didn't run. Not because they were brave, but because they had already lost everything. For some, fear had no meaning anymore. And sometimes, those are the most dangerous people of all. Among them was him. At first glance, he looked like just another survivor, another face in a collapsing world. But his eyes told a different story. There was no panic in them, no confusion, only something deeper, something heavier, as if this wasn't the first time he had seen the world end. Then they came. The true beginning of humanity's nightmare. Creatures born from that tear in reality, beings that defied logic and reason. They weren't just strong, they were overwhelming. Weapons barely scratched them. And every second they remained, more people died. Screams filled the air, not just of pain, but of pure helplessness. Because this wasn't a fight. It was a massacre, and humanity was losing, still. Some chose to resist. Not because they believed they could win, but because standing still meant certain death. And in moments like that, even the smallest act of defiance becomes a form of hope. But he didn't move like the others. While everyone else reacted, he observed. While others panicked, he calculated. Because deep down, he already knew how this would unfold. And then something changed. Not in the world, but in him. A presence, a power, something buried deep within him began to awaken. As if the chaos around him wasn't a threat, but a trigger. That energy wasn't normal. It didn't feel like something human. It was heavier, darker, more ancient. Like something that had been sleeping for a very long time and had finally found a reason to wake up. And right on cue, death came rushing toward him. A creature, massive and grotesque, aimed directly at him, like the world itself was trying to erase his existence before it was too late. Anyone else would have run. Anyone else would have screamed or begged or frozen in fear, but not him. Because in that moment, he wasn't afraid of dying. He was remembering something, fragments. Broken memories, echoes of something that shouldn't exist, flashed through his mind. Scenes of battles, of death, of power far beyond anything happening now. As if this wasn't the beginning for him. And just as the creature prepared to tear him apart, something inside him finally clicked. Not fear, not desperation, but recognition. The attack never landed. Because in that instant, he moved. Faster than anyone could see, faster than the creature could react. And for the first time since the chaos began, something unexpected happened. The monster was the one sent flying. A single movement, a single action, and something that had been slaughtering humans effortlessly was treated like nothing. Silence followed. Not because the chaos stopped, but because for a brief moment, everyone nearby witnessed the impossible. A human fighting back and winning. But he didn't celebrate, didn't react, didn't even acknowledge what he had just done. Because to him, this wasn't surprising. It was expected. His eyes had changed. Not physically, but in what they carried. There was clarity now, purpose, and something far more dangerous than fear, certainty. That feeling, it wasn't new to him. The power flowing through his body didn't feel foreign. It felt familiar, like something he had used countless times before in a life he couldn't fully remember yet. Every movement, every breath felt natural. And deep inside, a terrifying thought began to surface. This has already happened before, but the world didn't stop to let him think. The creatures kept coming, drawn to him now, as if they could sense the anomaly standing in their path. One after another, They surrounded him, hungry, relentless, and completely unaware that they were no longer the hunters. He didn't hesitate, didn't question what was happening, because instinct had already taken over. His body remembered what his mind still couldn't fully grasp. And in that moment, he made a decision, not to survive, but to dominate. And then he disappeared. To everyone watching, it was as if he had simply vanished. But in reality, he had already moved. Faster than the eye could follow, faster than the monsters could react, like a force that no longer belonged to human limits. In a single breath, it was over. Bodies fell, one after another, before anyone even realized what had happened. There were no long battles, no struggles, just instant, overwhelming destruction. And at the center of it all, he stood untouched. The battlefield, which had moments ago been a place of despair, now felt different. Not safe, but controlled. Because something had changed. The balance had shifted. And for the first time, the monsters were no longer in control. Even so, a small part of him hesitated. Not out of fear, but curiosity. He looked at his own hand, as if questioning how far this power truly went. Because if this was only the beginning, then what was he really capable of? And just like before, the memories returned. Stronger this time. Clearer. Visions of battles far greater than this. Of enemies far more terrifying. And of himself, standing at the center of it all. Not as a victim, but as something far worse. He saw himself, but not as he was now. Weaker, younger, powerless. A version of him that struggled, that suffered, that had to fight desperately just to survive. And that version was the truth of where this all began. He saw himself, but not as he was now. Weaker, younger, powerless. A version of him that struggled, that suffered, that had to fight desperately just to survive. And that version was the truth of where this all began. The memories faded, but the feeling remained. A quiet understanding of what he had been through and what he had become. His expression didn't change much, but inside, something had settled. He wasn't confused anymore. But just as things seemed to slow down, a new presence emerged. Stronger, heavier, more dangerous. These weren't the same creatures as before. These were something else. Something closer to the source of the chaos itself. And then it revealed itself. A being far beyond the others. Its presence alone was suffocating. Like standing in front of something that shouldn't exist. And for the first time since his awakening, the air around him grew heavy. Their eyes met. Predator. And something even worse. Because while the creature saw prey, he saw something else entirely. A challenge. And maybe a clue. The atmosphere tightened. The ground beneath them cracked. As if the world itself couldn't handle what was about to happen. This wasn't like before. This wasn't a massacre. This was going to be a real fight. And just like that, it began. The creature moved first, faster than anything before it. Its attack tore through the air, carrying enough force to destroy everything in its path. A strike meant not just to kill, but he didn't panic. Didn't dodge immediately. Because in that moment, he understood something important. This was what he had been waiting for. At the last possible second, he moved. Not wildly, not desperately, but perfectly. A precise motion, refined, controlled, like someone who had fought this battle more times than he could count. The impact shook everything. A shockwave exploded outward, sending debris flying in every direction. Anyone watching could only stand frozen, because this wasn't human anymore. This was something else entirely. And when the dust settled, they were both still standing, unmoved, unbroken. Two forces, now fully aware of each other. And deep down, he realized something chilling. This fight was only the beginning. For a brief moment, everything stood still. Not because the battle was over, but because both sides were measuring each other. The creature wasn't like the others. It wasn't mindless. It understood what stood before it, and that made it far more dangerous. Its body twisted unnaturally, as if it wasn't bound by the same physical rules. Every movement it made felt wrong, like reality itself was bending just to accommodate its existence. This wasn't just a monster. It was something closer to a higher entity. And yet, he didn't look intimidated. If anything, his focus sharpened. Because deep inside, a memory was starting to connect the pieces. A memory that told him he had faced something like this before. Not just chaos, but an all-out war. Countless beings far stronger than anything here, clashing across a shattered world. And at the center of it was him. Not as a survivor, but as a key player. He wasn't weak there. He wasn't struggling. He stood tall, surrounded by destruction, yet completely in control. A version of himself far beyond what he is now, And that could only mean one thing: he had fallen from that level. The present snapped back into place. No time to process, no time to fully understand. Because the enemy had already made its move again. And this time, it wasn't holding back. The attack tore through everything. The ground split, the air screamed. Even the light seemed to distort under its force. This wasn't something meant to test him. This was something meant to end him, completely. But instead of backing away, he stepped forward. A small movement, but one filled with absolute confidence. Because in that moment, he stopped reacting and started remembering. The power inside him surged again. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just awakening. It was evolving, becoming more refined, more controlled, more aligned with what it was always meant to be. And then he met the attack head on. No hesitation, no fear, just pure execution. The kind of movement that only comes from experience, from repetition, from a past that has been lived and relived. The collision was overwhelming. Light and darkness collided, forcing everything around them to submit to their power. It wasn't just a clash of strength. It was a clash of existence itself. And for a moment, it felt like the world might break again. But when it ended, he was still there, standing, unshaken, as if the attack had never truly reached him. And that was the moment everything changed. Because for the first time, the creature reacted. Not aggressively, not violently, but hesitantly. A small crack in its dominance. A realization that it might not be the strongest presence here. He began to walk, slowly, deliberately, each step heavier than the last. Not physically, but in presence. Because now, he wasn't just fighting, he was asserting control. There was no rage in his face, no excitement. Just calm, cold, calculated calm. The kind that comes from someone who already knows the outcome. And that calmness was far more terrifying than any scream. Sensing the shift, the creature lashed out again. Not with precision this time, but desperation. Because deep down, even it understood. The balance had already tipped. And then he vanished. Not fast. Not like before, but completely. As if he had stepped outside the rules of the battlefield itself. And in the next instant, he was behind it. No warning. No build-up. Just presence. A silent declaration that the fight was over. One move. That's all it took. A clean, precise, unavoidable strike. No wasted motion. No excess force. Just certainty. And with that, the outcome was sealed. The creature fell, its form breaking apart, as if it had never truly belonged here to begin with, and once again, silence returned. But this time, it wasn't filled with fear. He stood alone, surrounded by the remains of a battle that should have been impossible to win. And yet, here he was, uninjured, unshaken, and slowly, understanding. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was something else entirely. Something planned, something repeated, something inevitable. His gaze returned to the sky, to that unnatural tear in reality, because deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. Not even close. His gaze returned to the sky, to that unnatural tear in reality, because deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. Not even close. Something else was coming. Something bigger. Something that made everything so far feel insignificant. And this time, it wouldn't just be a test, but he didn't look away, didn't hesitate, because now he understood his role. Not as a survivor, but as something far more dangerous. For the first time since everything began, there was a moment of stillness. Not peace, not safety, but a pause. As if the world itself needed time to process what had just happened. But for him, this silence only made things clearer. Because suddenly, the destruction faded from his mind, replaced by something completely different, a life that felt distant now. Simple, ordinary. A version of reality untouched by chaos. A version where he was just human. A classroom. Voices overlapping. Laughter, complaints, the small, meaningless details of everyday life. Things people usually take for granted until they're gone. And in that memory, he was there too. Just another student blending into the background. Back then, he wasn't special, wasn't strong, didn't stand out. If anything, he was the type people overlooked, the type people ignored, until they needed someone to step on. And of course, people like that become targets, mocked, pushed. dismissed, not because they did anything wrong, but simply because they were there. And in a world like that, silence becomes a habit. He endured it. Every insult, every hit, every moment of humiliation, not because he was weak, but because he had no choice. Because at that time, there was nothing he could do. But even then, there was something inside him, something buried deep, something that refused to completely break. A quiet anger, a silent resistance, waiting for the right moment. And then, that moment came. Not gradually, not gently, but violently, the same way it happened now. The sky breaking, the world collapsing, the beginning of everything. That was the true beginning. The first time the world ended. The first time humanity realized it was no longer at the top of the chain. And just like now, everything fell apart. But back then, he wasn't strong. He ran. He hid. He struggled just to stay alive. Every second was a fight. And every mistake cost lives. People died. Friends, strangers. It didn't matter. Everyone was the same in the end. Fragile. Replaceable. Gone in an instant. And each loss carved something deeper into him. But instead of breaking, he changed. Slowly. Battle after battle. He adapted to that brutal world. He learned from pain. He learned from failure. And more than anything, he learned that weakness was no longer an option. And with time, the boy who was ignored, the one who was stepped on, disappeared. In his place, someone new was born. Someone who didn't just survive, but faced the chaos head on. And now, back in the present, everything finally made sense. This wasn't the first time. This wasn't the first collapse of the world. This was a cycle, a reset. And this time, he wasn't the same person anymore. His eyes lock onto the sky, that fracture that brought the end of everything. But unlike before, there was no fear, only certainty, because now he knows what's coming. He knows who the real enemies are. He knows where everything goes wrong. And this time, he won't make the same mistakes. He won't run. He won't lose. This time, he'll go all the way and break the cycle, no matter the cost. If you made it this far, then you already know. On Kain, the impossible is just the beginning. Subscribe now and don't miss the next chapter.